Hi, this is Rabbi Chaim Coffman. I want to welcome everyone to our 7th installment of the Torah portion of the week. We're holding by Parshas Vayeitze. Vayeitze is packed. There's a lot there to speak about. You have Yaakov going to Lavan, and he works 7 years for Rachel, and he ends up getting, she gets switched for Leah, and Leah has a whole bunch of children, and Rachel doesn't have children, and then Rachel gives her maidservant to him, and he has children through her. Eventually, he ends up having children. He has a child through her, which is Yosef. And then from there, he sees that his father is that Lavan is not the same, doesn't look the same towards him, and he ends up leaving with his wife and with his kids, and basically with all of Lavan's property. So there's a lot of things going on here. So I want to try and just highlight a few things. At the beginning of the Parsha, chapter 28, verse 10, the Torah says that Jacob makes a vow. Yaakov makes a vow, and he says, God will be with me. If he will guard me on this way I'm going, and he'll give me bread to eat and clothes to wear, I return in peace to my father's house, and Hashem will be a God to me. Then the stone which I've set up as a pillar shall become a house of God, and whatever you will give me, I shall repeatedly tithe to you. So that's actually starting with verse 20, going through verse 22. Now here he makes a vow. It's interesting that he makes a vow, but he says that if God's going to be with him, if he's going to guard him, and he will give me bread to eat and clothes to wear. Right? And then Hashem will be a God for me. What's his condition? Right? Why does he have to make such a condition? The simple explanation is, as the Talmud tells us, he's afraid that even though, if God will promise that he's going to take care of him and he's going to guard him, then really Yaakov has nothing to worry about. But here, what's Yaakov worried about? He's worried that if he does something wrong and he's held accountable for that, then he's not going to warrant God's protection. So therefore he says, if God will be with me, right, does he really think God's not going to be with him? Right, God's already promised, right, to Yitzhak, and he promises to Yaakov. So what's he worried about? If God promises, he's not just going to withdraw it. So the issue is, Yaakov says, as the Talmud tells us, if he does something wrong, if he sins in the future, which causes God not to guard him or watch over him, that's what he's worried about. Can it happen? It can happen. Right? If we do something that God doesn't want us to do, it could be, even if he promised something, it's contingent on us. So if we don't uphold our end of the bargain, then God can take away and decide he's not going to do X, Y, or Z. Now, that's one thing. So we should not just Yaakov, but ourselves. We should also be conscious that if things are going well, or things are positive, etc., right? We want to make sure that it continues that way, and that we do what he wants us to do. Because when we go in that path, all things being equal, we should have divine protection. Now, obviously, there are reasons why that may not happen, why we may lose protection, trials, tribulations, right? We've spoken about that in the past, right? We're not gonna beat that down here. So, but we should be afraid, though, is that I may do something to lose that divine protection. So the Talmud says that's what Yaakov is afraid of. That something may happen that he may do or cause, which that blanket of protection is now going to be gone. Now, but what does he say further? And this is really what I wanted to harp on, which is the end of that verse. He says that if God protects him and will give him bread to eat and clothes to wear. So what does it mean to give bread to eat and clothes to wear? Does that mean that he's going to sustain him? At what level? So here some of the commentaries say that when Yaakov said this, he was setting up an ideal. What's the ideal? The ideal is to live with less. He says, if God will give me bread to eat and clothes to wear. If we take it literally, bread to eat doesn't mean I have lavish meals. Bread to eat doesn't mean, I eat meat 2 or 3 times a week. Bread to eat means I eat minimally to sustain my body. Right? I'm not going to eat chocolate. I'm not going to eat fancy things. I'm going to eat enough to sustain my body. And, I'm not going to have a huge wardrobe. I'll have enough to wear. And, when it's warmer, when it's colder, I'll have what I need. But I'll have the bare minimum. I won't need more than that. That's what he says. Or that's what he seems to say. Now, how do we look at this? We could look at it and say, well, maybe Yaakov's talking about an ideal that we have no conception of. See, we're living in a generation, probably the richest generation in the history of man. Even though, the stock market will be up and down, the cost of living has gone up, that's true. And things are expensive, etc. That also may be true. Compared to, let's say, before the war, before World War II, we're living in luxury, tremendous luxury, compared to our forefathers, right? Compared to our great-grandparents. They lived in poverty, right? You look in most places in Europe, especially Russia, right? Well, you look at Russia, people were starving. There was no food. So, today, at the very least, no matter what a person has, and again, I'm not talking about third world countries where people are starving and there's mismanagement. I'm talking about where, people live a normal, a relatively normal life. And a normal life means you have food to eat. You're not going to sleep, hungry. So now the question is, how should we live? This is what Yaakov says. Yaakov says, I only want bread to eat. I will take the minimum. And I will survive. And the reason is because if I take all these extra things and I use them, that could take away from my service to God. Now, you might say, if I ate a candy bar, if I get an ice cream, that's going to take away my service from God. There were great individuals, I'm just going to mention, maybe for the rest of us, this doesn't apply. But there were great individuals who don't eat this stuff. Or didn't, eat these type of things. The reason is that they didn't want to benefit so much from this world. They wanted to use this world for what it was, but they wanted to maximize their service to God. So that boggles the mind. You might say, you're talking thousands of years ago. You're talking about people who lived on a different plane, maybe on a different planet. That may be true. But I'm not talking about 2,000 years ago. I'm not talking about 1,000 years ago. I'm not even talking 100 years ago. You have people that want to live a simple life, right? And wanting to live a simple life means I don't have extras. I'm not looking to indulge. Now again, if we break this down is there a real problem with indulging? And the answer is, everything can be used for the sake of heaven. Also, if it's not used properly, then it can take away my service from God. You ate a piece of chocolate. You had 2 pieces of cake. A cookie, something, something sweet. And you want to say, that took away my service from God? See, the problem is that you may say this doesn't apply. This is what Yaakov said. He didn't mean it for all future generations. He meant for tzaddikim, for righteous people to live such a way. That may be true. Because you can only have certain individuals, especially today, if they grew up, in a more modern society with plenty of, with money and with food. It makes this almost an impossibility. But see, if we break it down, a little bit, I think we see an incredible thing in the bigger picture. And that's like this. The Talmud says that very few people inherit both worlds. Right? You have this world and you have the next world. So you don't have people, the vast majority of people, that have money that are also Talmidei Chachamim, that they're also rabbinic scholars. Because basically the two don't mix. Doesn't mean they can't, because there were people that had both. It doesn't mean they can't. But the vast majority doesn't work. If a person has money, most likely he's not going to be so spiritual. You can say, what? I have to take a life of poverty, in order to be a spiritual person? No, that's what the Christians say. We're not Christians. We're not interested in being Christians, right? We're Jews, or Jews want to be, or people just want to learn Torah, what the Torah says. So the idea is that, you're allowed to make money. You're allowed to support your family. That's not the issue. The issue is how you live. If a person has the merit to make a lot of money, what does he do with it? Does he make enough and then he uses all his time to sit and learn? Or does he use the money for, fancy homes, fancy cars, fancy this, that, and the other thing? What does he use it for? So, in this world, we're allowed to get benefit. We're allowed to get benefit from it. The whole purpose is that we enjoy it. You see, God gave us a book. It's called the Torah. He showed us how to use it. So if you have money, and you have a lot of money, most likely, as the Torah says in the book of Deuteronomy, most likely, when you have gold and silver, the Torah says that, you have wealth and you'll forget me. God took us out of Egypt. God sustains us. He sustains the universe on a daily basis. You want to say, I'm going to forget? We're going to forget who God is? So when a person's living off the fat of the land, so to speak, and has money, so with money comes certain things. Right? With money comes a certain level of power, because you can do things other people can't. Influence, other things. People come to you, maybe for advice, for, they want to get in your good graces, whatever. Money can have a strong effect on a person. Doesn't mean we can't do good things with it. But you see, the problem is that the more you have, the more you want. Right? The Mishnah in Perkei Avos says if you have 100, right? If you have 100, you want 200. If you have 200, you want 400. So money can be a curse as well. So I've heard many people say, I'd love to have that curse. Right? It's better than struggling. Well, that may be true. But you see, money's also a trial. If God gives it to you and you're successful, you have an obligation. The obligation is to help others. Right? You have to give charity. You have to give at least 10% of whatever you make after taxes. But if you have a lot of money, that's much more responsibility. And you get 10 people, 20 people knocking at your door, you get aggravated after a while. Someone says, yeah, I'd love to have that problem. And not so simple. Definitely not so simple. So, the Ramban in Parshas Kedoshim, when the Torah says, Kedoshim to you, that you should be holy, the Ramban says you can be considered a menuvel b'reshus HaTorah. You can be considered disgusting in God's eyes for the sole reason that you abuse things that are permissible. You're going to say, if it's permissible, what's the problem? You're allowed to eat, no problem. Right? So how can you be disgusting in God's eyes? Because you're a glutton, you're overweight. You abuse it. Right? There are other things that are permissible to do. But if you do them in excess, you are abusing it. So technically speaking, you could be doing what the Torah wants. And you could be a Torah Jew praying 3 times a day. But in the bigger scheme of things, God says you're abusing X, Y, and Z. You're making blessings disgusting in my eyes. Say it's disgusting. A person, eats themselves to who knows what. I'm allowed to eat, what's the problem? So anything you do in excess is bad. There has to be, as the Rambam says, a happy medium. You're allowed to get benefit, but you're not allowed to go beyond what you should do. If that's the case, you're held accountable. So if a person has a lot of money and they don't give enough, God can say, I gave this money as a pikadon, as collateral, as a deposit. I can also take it away. If you don't use it right, then you don't deserve it. So, what's permissible will depend on what we have. If you have a lot, again, you have tremendous responsibility. But the question here is, and we could speak about that for a while, but I don't want to get too off topic here. The topic here is, what's the ideal? Is the ideal bread to eat and clothes to wear? So, most people will say, that's for a different generation. Living with the bare minimum, very few people could handle that. Right? Maybe in previous generation, some people could have handled it. The vast majority, they want to enjoy. Right? Even if they don't have a lot, every once in a while, they want to enjoy. Indulge, so to speak. Is indulgence bad? No. But the question is, do you make the indulgence that's your whole life? Going on the next trip, eating the next fancy meal, going out to this restaurant. What are we doing? So the question we always have to ask in all these things is, what I'm doing now, at this split second, put that piece of cake down. No, I'm just kidding. At this split second, is it good in my service to God or not? And if it's not good, and then you have a debate, the question is, why isn't it good? Well, see, everybody knows. Everybody knows if what they're doing is right or wrong. There are gray areas. There are plenty of gray areas as well. But again, the goal is, as the Ramchal says, Rav Moshe Sternbuch brings down, in Path of the Just, and says a similar thing in the way of God. God is a meitiv. Being a meitiv means he wants the goodness for us. If he wants the goodness for us, he's going to show us how to do it. So that means we have to take it and do it in a way that is going to make him happy. So what is it? What is that? What is that? So he gave us a book. It's called the Torah. It wasn't a 5-year option to renew. This is the absolute word of God, with a running commentary at the same time that we call the Talmud, to explain what the Torah means. Be that as it may, he's telling us what to do and how to do it. The whole purpose, if God is a meitiv, and he wants only goodness for us, and to show his goodness, then when we do the right thing, we get closer to that. When we do the wrong thing, we go further, we go further away. Right? Even though we come further away, a person can do tshuva, come even closer. So in short, what I do matters. And therefore, we should think about what we do. Is it good for my soul? Is it not good for my soul? Should it be good for my soul? If it's a gray area, then, a person has to ask their own question to their own rabbinic authority. Is it beneficial? Is it not beneficial? See, but you see, from previous generations, including this generation, you very rarely see, if ever, which we mentioned, someone who has a tremendous amount of money and they are a rabbinic scholar. Usually, both things do not go hand in hand. Doesn't mean they can't, but usually, if someone has money, they're just running after money. They don't put the money aside. Most people, even if they had enough to live on, wouldn't put enough money aside to live on and sit and learn, because they're too worried about their money. I know someone who was in business, or still is in business, and sat and learned for many, many years, had plenty of money. I still had to run this business, but, had plenty of money, sat and learned, for many years. He once told me that, it's impossible for him to give up the business. The reason is because it's so inside of him that even just to say, okay, here's a ton of money, I'm going to put it away, get whatever interest it gets, I'll be able to live off it, my kids for a very long time. I won't have to do anything. He said, I can't do it. He said it's an impossibility because so wrapped up in business and deals and this and that even though he sat and learned for many years, it's not the same. You can't just push that aside. It's a hard thing, Again, people would say, I'd love to be in that position. But you see, the taiva, the desire is so great that you're always worried about something. You never have menuchas hanefesh. Meaning, you never relax. You're always worried. Closing a deal, making a deal, this running right, not running right. You don't have any rest. So, somebody like that with that mentality, and he's had that mentality for years, to put all that into learning, he said it's an impossibility. It's a total impossibility. And to that we say, that's tragic. How many people do we know that have enough money to put aside and they can dedicate their lives to Torah? You might say, well, I don't know that many people that are that well up. Okay, that could be. But even if you had, thousands of people, Let's say you had, a good 5,000 people that could do that. Probably an exaggeration, but let's say 5,000 people. Could you get 10% to put the money aside? Let it earn enough interest? And sit and learn, dedicate yourself to Torah. 10%. 500 people. How about 5%? 250 people. How about 1%? 5. You're going to say I'm taking this out of context, and yeah, it could be. But I'm asking a basic question. And the answer is the two don't mix, usually. You'll find it in rare people. Very rare, if at all. And this is the reason. So Yaakov says, God, just give me bread to eat and clothes to wear. Forget about the extras. You know why? Because the extras are not going to help me, my avodas Hashem. It's not going to help me become closer to you. Just the opposite. It'll cause me distraction. I'll be worried all the time. I won't be able to do what I need to do. Just give me the basics. So then I would ask the $1 million question. Isn't that the way to live? Shouldn't we all desire just to have enough to live and that's it? They might say, well, it's harder today. People have a lot of kids. They have to marry them off. Like, who's got money to put aside? That could be true. But to see if we really broke it down, and I'm not going to do this, it would be extremely painful for everybody, of how much waste we go through. It's waste. But the problem is we feel we need it. Just in food, in general. How much people eat. And again, even if you're not overweight, it doesn't matter. You walk into a supermarket, you have aisles and aisles. Chocolate, candy, other things. So you're going to be watching this, you're going to say, Rabbi, what are you, crazy? Nobody lives this way. You prepare for Shabbos, you prepare for a festival, you have kids, of course you're going to get, you're going to get snack bags, other things, you're going to have cake, you have ice cream. You're right. Maybe I'm off my rocker. You're going to say, well, what do you do in your house? I'm like everybody else. I'm just asking that you probably could save quite a bit if you had to. And that money could be used for other things. Now again, that might be a stretch. If you didn't have the money, you wouldn't spend it on it. If you were very limited, you would spend it on absolute necessities. Yaakov says, only live according to absolute necessities. Because if you do that, you won't go far astray. You won't forget who God is. You'll be chomping on a candy bar. Oh God, this great candy bar. Unbelievable. You're not thinking that. You're like, chomp, chomp, it's great. See, nobody thinks like this. Or very few people do. It's not an ideal. It would be too hard for us to do. Society wouldn't be able to withstand it. Only by few individuals. But the more we get caught up in it, the more it takes us away. Give one example. You see every year, when Purim comes along, and people give out shalach manos, right? They give out, food, 2 different types of food, and they have and they have different themes. try and come up with, different themes and how many they're going to give out. And the halacha is that, if you're limited with money, it's better to give less of these gifts to people and rather give more to charity. But the people go beyond. I'm not saying they go beyond necessarily their means, per se, but they go beyond, what it should be. And people drive themselves crazy. Trying to think of the fanciest theme and this and that. Well, isn't that a part of Torah? Yeah. Purim's a part of Torah. We fast the day before. We hear the Megillah at night, during the day. You have a festive meal. Big festive meal. You dance, you sing, you drink. Or drink a little bit, whatever. It's not about extravagance. It's not about getting the fanciest things or trying to come up with the greatest theme or... you want to make something nice. You want to go overboard. When you live in a wealthy generation, you can go overboard. Even to say, well, we're not wealthy and we're not this. I don't mean having millions of dollars. Again, if you compare it to, previous generations, we live in the lap of luxury. Very few people, in general, going to sleep, with stomach pains because they're hungry. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. Certainly don't want to be misquoted. But, we're not talking about that. I think part of what he's saying here is if we would do that a little bit for ourselves, like Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said, that if you eat and you have a full plate of food, leave something over. I mean, I'm not talking like leaving a drumstick. Leave like a little bit over. Don't just like stuff it in your face. Leave a little bit over. Why? Because you want to show that, I don't have to just like eat everything and that there's no lack. Eat a little bit of humble pie, no pun intended. Leave a little bit over. See, we don't even think like this. Nobody would think like this. Again, you may turn this off now. You think he's out of his mind, which I may be. But Yaakov here says, if I had more, it would take away my avodah. It would take away my closeness. And he says, I don't want that. I just want to be sustained. Bare minimum. Today, bare minimum is not an ideal. What people are willing to sacrifice for, when you look at the sacrifice, not such a great sacrifice. If we would learn to live within our means, or at least have somewhat this ideal, instead of running after what other people have, or running after what we think we need, we'd be transformed people. You don't live to eat. You eat in order to live. You sleep in order to refresh your body so you can serve God better the next day. You don't sleep because sleeping in and of itself is a great thing. You're doing it because the body needs to rest. If it doesn't rest, your body will burn out. This is the message. Maximize your avodah. Maximize what you can do to serve God. Minimize this world as much as possible. That's one idea. The other thing I wanted to mention is if we look at chapter if we look at chapter 31 verse 19. Chapter 31 verse 19 tells us where Lavan chases after Yaakov, and Lavan comes and he's looking for his idols. So actually before as he flees, it says in verse 19, chapter 31 verse 19, it says Lavan had gone to shear his sheep, and Rachel stole the trophiim that belonged to her father. She stole the idols. She steals the idols that belonged to her father. Now the question what these trophiim were. It's clear Lavan was an idolater. The question is exactly what they were. Some say that what they were was things. It was a way to find out the future. So Rachel hid them in order that he wouldn't know that they fled. So my Rebbe here points out, says, Mori v'Rebbe Rav Moshe Sternbuch Shlita should be well. He says that, he brings this down, he says Rachel was worried that if he uses the idol and he'll find out that they have fled. So she hides them. She sits on them, she makes a mockery out of them, which for idolatry you're allowed to. Mitzvah to make mockery of it. So Rebbe points out from the Zohar that the Zohar says that she hit the idols and she's punished and she dies going towards Beit Lechem when she gives birth, and she dies because she didn't have proper bitachon. She didn't have proper belief in God, that they had to do what they needed to do and forget about the idol. Like, who cares about the idol? You think God's not going to take care of them? You know, and if God doesn't want Lavan to find out, he won't. Why do I have to put in the effort to do it? So God felt she was on a much higher level, and she got punished for this. Right? Others say that she was punished and she died because Yaakov wasn't allowed to be married to two sisters, even before the Torah was given. So when he comes into the land of Israel, she dies. So there are different possible reasons. This, according to the Zohar, will just make it easy. According to the Zohar, she's taken the task because she steals this idol or thing that he used for sorcery in order to know the future. So the Zohar says she's lacking in emunah. She's lacking in belief in God, that I have to do something, she felt, in order that my father won't find out where we are and that we're fleeing. And God says, no, you weren't allowed to do that. You were on a much higher spiritual level. We'll see by Joseph the same thing, right? That Joseph, when he's thrown in jail and he answers the dreams and explains the dreams of the baker and the wine steward, and he tells them that, you know, when you're put back into place, into power, and by the baker, so when you're put back into power, remember me and don't forget me. What do you mean, remember me and don't forget me? Remembering means don't forget me. You don't need to say it twice. Right? So those two things that he said, he's punished for an extra 2 years in jail, because he should have had much more belief in God, that God could have saved him and he shouldn't have done anything. Should have been on a higher level, not to rely on anybody else or do anything else. Should have just relied on God. Right? So therefore he's taken a task for that, as his mother is taking a task over here. So one thing we see is that if a person's on a much higher level, the amount of effort they put in should be minimal. They should rely on God, right? But the vast majority have to put in effort, because if you don't put in, if you don't put in effort, and say I'm just going to rely on God, but you don't rely on God for everything, you can't do that. If you rely on God for everything, that's something else. Then you could do that. But there's another question. I want to get into the idea of bitachon, right? That's a much bigger, a much bigger thing. That's one idea. But the other idea is that what does she do? She steals the idol. Her father is an idolater. If her father's an idolater, and we say she takes the idol not because she's afraid he's going to find out that they fled, and then he's going to, run after them. What does she do? She separates them from a Torah prohibition. Right? For a non-Jew, doesn't want to convert, what we call a Noahide, doesn't want to convert to Judaism, that's fine, because we're not looking for converts. If you want to stay a Noahide, you're more than welcome. Still eat shrimp, got a benefit. Nonetheless, one of the 7 Noahide laws, and there are many more than that, you can come to my class if you want to be a Noahide, what it means to be a Noahide. One of the 7 Noahide laws is idolatry. A non-Jew is not allowed to be an idolater. Question here is, what does she do? She wants to separate her father from doing something forbidden. She wants to make sure he's not going to worship idols. So what does she do? She takes the idol and she hides it. She wants to separate him from doing something forbidden. So in that case, is she allowed to do it? Or is she obligated to do it? In other words, there's a general question. For a non-Jew, right, any non-Jews watching this, is there an obligation for a Jew to try and bring them close and help them keep their mitzvahs? So, the mitzvah of outreach, of Jewish outreach, of working with Jews that don't know anything about Judaism and trying to bring them close, yeah, that's a mitzvah. Why? It's a mitzvah because there's a statement by a rabbi that says, Kol Yisrael Arevim Zeh B'Zeh. Every Jew is responsible for the other. We don't say every Jew is responsible for a non-Jew. We say for a Jew. Right? And you say, oh, that's racist. You only look out for your own. Well, don't the Italians look out for themselves? Don't, the Albanians look out for themselves? Don't the English look out for themselves? They start at home first. And then they venture out after that. In short, they take care of their own. Right? Everybody does it. It's not it's not a racist thing. So a Jew doesn't know anything about his religion. You try and bring him close. Only because we're all intertwined. If someone's doing something wrong, in X place, the entire Jewish people feel it. There are ramifications. Right? Just like the statement, if a person keeps Shabbos properly in Jerusalem, it has an effect on someone, in France or in Italy or, wherever. If you do something wrong, also has a negative effect. So what about non-Jews? Is there an obligation for a Jew to be out there educating them about drawing them close about their own mitzvahs? So, there's a difference between Jews and non-Jews. For a Jew, there's a mitzvah to go out there and try and help him. For a non-Jew, there's no mitzvah. You can say, there's no mitzvah, so what do you do? So if a non-Jew wants to learn, and a non-Jew comes to you, you're allowed to teach them, if you can. You going out to them, that's something else. Right? That's something else. Question is, let's say in my case, work with Noahites, trying to teach Noahites what they need or don't need to do. If I put up a blog or a website or something, is that forbidden? Is that trying to draw people close? Right? So the answer is no. It's just telling people I have a service, I can help them if they're in such a situation. But I'm not going around calling everyone and say, come, please, we need you. You need to be a Noahide. We don't want you to, be an idolater or doing these other things. We really want you to, be brought close. We're not doing that. Someone who's interested and they come out of Christianity or any other so-called religion and they come and they want to be educated, then it's a mitzvah to help them. No mitzvah to throw them away. They want to learn. They're good. They've given up idolatry. They don't want idolatry. They want to know what they need to do and they don't want to convert. So those people should be helped. The question is, am I, is a person allowed to go out there and try and bring them in? So that we say the answer is no. There are a number of reasons why. One possible reason is just getting involved in, unless, you're an absolute expert in these different types of idolatry or whatever, and speaking to people, it could cause you spiritual damage, right? That's one thing, if you're not careful. The other thing is, what about learning Torah? Learning Torah is more important than anything else. Does learning Torah go by the wayside in order to help these people? Right? It's a question. But I see, there are hundreds of people coming out of Christianity who want to be educated. They don't want to convert. So in that case, when they come and a person can help them, they should. You're not just separating them, from something forbidden. You're actively helping them get to where they need to go. Giving them direction. Giving them direction's okay, if you know what you're doing. If you don't know what you're doing, you should have half a brain in your head. Send them to people who do. So here we learn two things. One is the extent that if someone has tremendous spiritual ability and they misuse it or go against it or do something that doesn't fit to where they're holding, the punishment is very severe. There's tshuva involved, other things, but the punishment is severe. In Rachel's case, it was a lack in believing in God. So you see, the more we know, the greater we are, the greater the consequences. Also true. We also learn that a person doesn't have an obligation to bring a non-Jew closer to his mitzvahs. If he comes to you, it's one thing. You going out to mass is something else. But they might say, well, there are some groups that actively go out there. Okay. From what I've been taught and I've seen, they come to you, it's one thing. You trying to bring them closer, something else. Same thing in conversion. We're not here to try and convince someone to be a convert. If they're interested and they're legit and they'll do whatever it takes, then there's a mitzvah to help them. But you have to see if they're legit. You have to see if what they're doing, what they're saying and what they're doing is true. We're not here to convince them. I've had a number of people, want me to explain to them why JC is not the Messiah. It's not my job. There are other much more gifted people, that can do that. That do anti-missionary and counter-missionary work, right? That's not what I do. I want someone who's given them up, or given up any idol, whatever they worship. They believe that the Torah was given by God to Moses, who passed it down, and they're willing to do whatever it takes to get there in order to convert. They're the real deal. Those are the people I want to deal with. I should go and try and convince somebody why JC isn't the Messiah? I probably could. It's not my specialty. But at the end of the day, if someone's on the fence, we're not interested. Or let's rephrase that. I'm not interested. Judaism's not interested. Go find out if JC existed or he didn't exist. Then get back to me. And if you believe 100% he didn't exist, we'll talk. Before that, there's nothing to talk about. So this might sound a little bit harsh. What about all those non-Jews out there? They're not given a fighting chance. They're born into being a Hindu. They're born into being X or whatever. Shouldn't we go out and save them? No, that's Christianity. Judaism is about working with Jews. Whether they know a lot, they don't know a lot. You do whatever you can, you bring them together. Non-Jews, they want to convert, and they do what they need to do, we have no problem. We'll work with them. Someone who's a non-Jew, who doesn't want to convert, wants to be a Noahide, and says, please, I want to know what it means to be a Noahide, let's talk. But you want to say, me as a Jew, I have the obligation to go out there and be part of the masses, like ringing my bell, ding, ding, ding. All you non-Jews, give up the J guy, burn all your crosses, get rid of all your things. I'm not doing that. Judaism does not believe in proselytization. Even to help a non-Jew keep his own mitzvahs. That's the point. You want help, you want understanding, you want to see what it is, what I have to keep, that's one thing. A person should go around the world, convincing people. I don't have to do that. Oh, they invite you to a certain country because they have these ideas and they want to know what the truth is. That's something else. But you're not standing there ringing the bell trying to bring everybody in. That's the point. So to try and separate when someone's doing something that's forbidden, i.e. a non-Jew, right, and you have an opportunity to stop them, or to educate them would say it better, that's one thing. Going out there is a totally different, is a totally different ballgame. So I have to keep in mind, and we'll speak about this in upcoming videos when we speak about Yosef, most likely. And that is, Rachel's taken a task here. Because she's lacking in belief. If we're at a high level, obviously not at her level, but if we're at a high enough level, and if a person says, I have bread on the table today and I'm worried about tomorrow, he's called lacking in emunah. Person can worry about, what's going to be with this, what's going to be with that, but you already have food today. If you have food today, you can't worry about tomorrow. If you worry about tomorrow, or the next day, or the fourth day, or whatever, you're called lacking in emunah. At your level. That's going to be food for thought. Because that we're going to speak about. That we'll speak about in great detail. So, as we mentioned, I give these classes for conversion, and anyone who wants to be a Noahide, you can take a look at my Facebook page at Beyond Orthodox Conversion to Judaism, or Beyond Noahides, or you can look at my blog, rabbichaimcoffman.blogspot.com, RabbiChaimCoffman. Yes, it's Coffman with a C. That's the way my father spelled it. That's the way I spell it. .blogspot.com. I want to wish everyone a great and meaningful Shabbos.